first of all, I'll develop this teaching over the next week, starting Sunday night. I also hope to put the teaching up on my Rabbi Finley channel on YouTube. We'll be sending out links. I have my podcast all ready to go, and we'll be sending out links to everyone. So I'm going to say things briefly, and if you're curious about what I say, there'll be follow-up. First of all, as I discussed thoroughly at our fantastic member gathering, Shabbat afternoon study session on December 3rd, the idea of the high priest not having enough oil, and they had to light the candles for 8 days. They only had enough oil for 1 day, and therefore the tradition of Hanukkah, which is to celebrate the miracle of the oil, is never mentioned in either of the books of the Maccabees. So where are the books of the Maccabees? They're in what is called the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha is not considered canonical in Judaism, is not considered canonical in the Protestant Bible. It's canonical in the Catholic Bible. So if you wanted a printed edition of the Apocrypha, at least back in the day when I was before the internet, you had to buy something like the New English Bible that had the Hebrew Bible, it had the Apocrypha, and it had the New Testament. Now, nowadays, of course, you can go online and just type in the Apocrypha or type in books of Maccabees. There are 2 historical books of Maccabees. They're by 2 different authors, pretty similar, but 2 different perspectives on what happened during the Maccabean revolt against the Syrian Hellenists. There's also Maccabees 3 and 4 that have nothing at all to do with the Maccabean Revolution. Why they're called books of Maccabees, no one really has any idea. So the miracle of the oil is not written in the book of Maccabees. Where do we find it? We find it in the Talmud. And I believe the Talmud presents it as a fable, as one of those what are called etiological myths, meaning myths of causes. And that's why today we do the following. It has no historical basis whatsoever. Unfortunately, when people were teaching about these things, most did not have access to the Apocrypha, but they had access to the Talmud. So the story of the so-called miracle of oil was taught everywhere, even though it is completely not historical. It has no historical validity whatsoever. The attraction of the story is, of course, it focuses on a miracle of oil for 1 night lasting 8 nights. What does it not include? It does not include the Maccabean Revolution. Now, why would the Talmud not want to include the miracle of the victory that we find in our prayer book and many other sources? Because when the Mishnah and Talmud were coming into being, the people of Israel had suffered through 2 terrible revolts against the Romans. The Great Revolt of 67 to 70, which was put down, the temple was destroyed, it led to great exile. Another rebellion in 132 to 135 BCE. Again, great devastation to the land. These traditions came together around 200 CE, and they didn't want any further mention of rebelling against the occupying power, against specifically the Romans, because of the Great Revolt of 67 to 70 and the Bar Kokhba Revolution of 132 to 135 CE. So the miracle of the oil is interesting for me because of what the ancient rabbis did not want to say, which is the history of the Maccabean Revolution, which one actually finds in the prayer book. And I'll talk about this during the week of Hanukkah. Now, instead of talking about the miracle of the oil, and not really even the revolution of the Maccabees, the Hasidic tradition asks a different question. The Hasidic tradition goes on to what's happening in the heart of the Maccabees, where they saw a battle that they knew they couldn't win. And their question was, do we give up this tradition that we've inherited and let Antiochus IV eradicate what we would call now the Jewish religion? Or do they take a stand, or do they fight? And there was widespread despair. This is reported in both of the books of the Maccabees. So I think what the Hasidic tradition tries to do is ask, what happens in the heart of a human being that has despair, that has no hope, and cannot see a way out? What happens to produce hope? What happens to produce the will to make things better? So when the Hasidim look at the miracle of the oil, they don't ask about oil miraculously going on for 8 days. They ask, what's the miracle that happens in the heart of a human being where they might feel great despair, but they move forward anyway? Meaning the light in them wrestles with the darkness, and the light within them eventually wants to radiate into the darkness. So in the Hasidic tradition, as I again shared on December 3rd, there's a wonderful focus on a line from Proverbs that says, Ner mitzvah v'Torah or. The light is the commandment, and the light, Ner mitzvah, the light is the mitzvah, the candle is the mitzvah, meaning the candle, the unlit candle. Torah or, the teaching is the light. And they wanted to have this refer to every human being in those moments of our own inner darkness. And I have to share with you, I probably have seen this at least once a month in either an individual counseling or a couples counseling. And here's something that I hear. Let's say with a couple, and I just heard it this week. They say, it's gotten so bad. We have such trouble communicating with each other. We're so estranged from each other. Every conversation turns into an argument. We just have despair. We cannot see a way forward. And I will ask about the wall of virtue, things like that. And the minute I try to teach, reduce the criticism, reduce the defensiveness, another story comes in. But the other night, the other one said this. And the other night, the other one said this. And I tried to say that, and they got upset. The theme in all of these conversations, somebody else did something wrong, so of course I acted badly. Always blaming someone else for what they do. They triggered me. I couldn't do anything else. And because I've had so much experience teaching this, sometimes when it's a person who's either forgotten wisdom work or never studied it, I truly look with some astonishment that people still say that. Because of what they said, I couldn't do anything else. I've heard it my entire counseling life. What do I say? Let's discuss an honor code. An honor code means you act according to the honor code. That's developed with reason, is developed in the knowledge of the soul. So the soul and the mind link together and say, here's what it means to live with honor. Now, honor is rooted in our values. We think about it with rationality and wisdom. We produce the honor code. Now, what happens with many people is, I want them to live by the honor code. And I won't live by the honor code unless they live by the honor code. That is not an honor code. And here's one thing that one has to, in my mind at least, nobody else should live by the honor code but me. If someone else wants to live by an honor code, that's great. Ma tov, wonderful for everybody. But I can't should them into living with honor. You can't persuade a resistant person to do, not do, understand, realize, or be anything, including honorable, meaning living by an honor code when things get tough. The only should that I can do is toward myself. The only ought is to myself. If someone says to me, what is this honor code? How do you know it makes things better? I can talk about that. But if I say, and you should live by it, I have to do that by invitation only. I can say, if you want things to get better in your life, either develop an honor code or live by an honor code. And you're always in conversation with the honor code. Honor code is not static, it's dynamic. So, of course, my recommendation was start with virtue. Stop the criticizing, stop the defensiveness, allow the soul of the marriage. And this has to do with spousal relationships, life partners, parents and children, children and parents. And you know my commitment to civility above everything in our national debate. I'm most tuned into what's happening here and in Israel, is There are ways to make things worse, and there are ways to make things better. The way to make things worse is to use hateful, invective, rile up emotions, and call the other side names, and present your side with a highly biased, tailor-made narrative. I see it all the time. I watch our culture wars carefully, and that in Israel. And then there are those that say, let's speak only facts. Let's not misquote anybody. Let's not use slogans. Let's try to figure out exactly what the issue is, put all the facts together. And once we have all the facts assembled with a ferocious, honorable devotion to truth, name exactly what the problem is and exactly what someone else proposes. You know, in the Talmud, the standard for this idea of these and these are the words of the living God. But why did God prefer the school of Hillel? Because the school of Hillel presented the opposing point of view thoroughly and fairly. That's the Jewish standard. The Jewish standard is before you have an opinion, whether it's in the culture wars, political debate, on any issue, all the way down to the things that happen in your home. First, understand the point of view of the other person, articulate it to their satisfaction, so they can say, yes, that's exactly what I think. Then you compose a response with the goal of reconciliation. That's the light. Now, in warfare, the light is courage. I want to share another conversation with you that I had in the past week. I was honored to be on another a podcast this week, and it was soon after the recrudescence of anti-Semitic incidents. And the person interviewing me was very concerned about the anti-Semitism. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? I said, look, we have to defend the perimeter. You know, when we had our facility, we had a great security crew, and you know, we knew how to secure the perimeter of our building. But when we were in our building, we didn't sit around and talk about anti-Semitism. We didn't sit around and talk about guarding the perimeter. What were we guarding? What were we guarding? We were guarding people making their lives whole and better, becoming whole human beings by the study of our tradition. We guard the perimeter so that the beauty of our tradition can illuminate into our lives. So the person kept asking me about one anti-Semitic thing or another, and I said to the person, I'm willing to do what it takes to fight anti-Semitism. One of the greatest ways that I fought anti-Semitism, by the way, was teaching the Holocaust class at USC for 10 years. I think I did a huge amount of good. I had 100 students every semester. I brought them into the history of anti-Semitism, the history of the Holocaust, and every single semester students came up to me, non-Jewish students came up to me and said, I never understood until now. So if I had 100 students twice a year for 10 years, it's quite a number of people. I wish I could keep doing it. That was in my past. But let's say we can do that. But then what is it that we're protecting? So what I said to the person is, at some level on the outside, I want to worry about these people, but I don't want to take up too much mental space. Because the more space you give them, that begins to define Judaism. Yes, we have to fight bigotry and hatred, racism, oppression in our country. Yes, we do. Okay? And we should be all committed to those worthwhile battles to preserve our values. I'm going to put that aside now. But that's not what I see in human suffering. When people come to me with their suffering because of internal warfare, internal darkness in their relationships. So when the person asked me about it, I said, I don't want my mind consumed with enemies and allies. I don't want my mind consumed with hatred. Do I hate these people? Yes. But I don't want to think about hatred all day long. What do I want to think about? Once we guard the perimeter and are going to fight for our values, what happens inside? So Hanukkah for me is a time when we truly and deeply study the light. Every one of our holidays has its own metaphor. The metaphor is there is a light inside of every one of us. The light is the oil, is the essence down in the soul. The essence needs a candle, a ner, in order to use the wick, as it were, and come up and shine into light. How does one bring the essence through the candle into consciousness and produce light? How do we light the candle? That requires daily acts of will and intentionality, especially in moments when you feel the darkness within you coming, whether it's anger, depression, resentment, hatred. Those are bad things. And it distresses me when I see good people engage in hateful language, either in general, which is against Jewish law, by the way. Jewish law is uncompromising about this. The laws of Lashon Hara. Whatever it is you feel, if those feelings lead to harsh invective, one has to say to oneself, how would a rational person say this? What's a moderate way to say this? It says in the Mishnah, in the very beginning of Pirkei Avot, Hevu metunim badin. Be moderate in your judgment. Every single human being is uncompromising. How much the more so in our interpersonal relationships and our families. So my meditation for Hanukkah, by the way, as I think about these things, what do I find myself happening? I was talking with Rabbi about this today. I find myself really upset at people who use harsh invective. I said, I'm doing it myself. Instead of asking myself, how do I root myself in the light? How do I allow my light to wrestle with the darkness? How do I allow my light to radiate into that darkness? How do I root myself in being, an emissary of this truth and of this light? Got to calm myself down. I have to widen my heart. People go to bad places. It's interesting. Other thing that happened in this discussion, the person asked me about, with all this violence, what do I think about, carrying a gun? And, now in California, and, people can get a carry permit. I said, I don't want one. I have my pepper spray. And they said, why not? And I'll say exactly what I said. I said, where I grew up, I suffered a lot from people that I think objectively could have been described as evil, but they were 14. If I had a weapon, I would have killed them, undoubtedly, to protect myself. I felt my life in danger. I've contacted some of my tormentors on Facebook. I've tracked them down and say, hey, you remember me, Finley, the white kid? What was up with you? And they said, I apologize. It was the times. Got swept up in something. And the hatred came out, and we were taught hatred, and you stood for everything we hated. Really sorry. I've had that conversation more than once. And now I think to myself, I said to the person interviewing me, I said, what if I would have killed him? What if I would have had the capacity to kill my tormentor? That person would have never grown into teshuvah. So one thing I said to the person, I don't want to be the person in some kind of violent confrontation who's going to end up killing somebody. There are so many other ways to get out of a confrontation. There are so many other ways to live safely than walking around ready to kill somebody. Now, I got a lot of pushback. What about this? What about this? What about this? What about all these other things? I said, I will protect my home. I got to make a decision. I'm going to walk around with a weapon or not? The answer is no. And part of it is because I value human life so much that I know how to live safely, and I really don't want to hurt other people. I really don't want to. Now, this interviewer really pushed me and pushed me down into my values. And I really never thought about it as much as saying to this person, I'm not saying the person interviewing me was entirely satisfied with my answer, but I felt myself, and I actually said to this person, I don't want to walk around in fear. I don't want to walk around ready to kill people. I don't want to consume myself with enemies and allies. I really don't want to think about that. I'll try to be 360 awareness. I'll try to be ready. But every single day, I want to go inside myself. I want to go to my soul, find that spiritual essence of love, justice, truth, and beauty, to bring that candle up, to bring that light out into the world. So I think if we meditate on this idea, whatever else you do for Hanukkah, spin dreidels, make sufganiot, make latkes, all that great stuff in our culture, all the fun and games, and we'll do that during this week. But there's a moment when the Hanukkah candles are lit, and we say the blessings, and we say Hanerot Halalu. There's a moment when you look in your soul, and you look at the people around you, and you say to yourself, every one of us has a spiritual essence. Every one of us has a deep soul knowledge. And every one of us has the holy responsibility, as it said in the Hasidic tradition, not to focus only on the courage of the Maccabees. That's really important. But most of us are not going to be called into a war against our oppressors. Very few people. Very few people. What most of us are going to deal with is creating holy relationships with people around us and trying to calm down other people when they go to hateful places. I think that's the main way that this, as it were, oil, essence, light inside of us is going to be expressed into the world. I'll touch on this on every night of Hanukkah. I'll teach a little bit more about the different Hasidic traditions, but I wanted to just give you an introduction of how I internally observe Hanukkah, my internal practice, and say a little bit more about it in the coming weeks.